Hey everybody, this is Dave Kemp and welcome to another episode of the Righteous Savages podcast. So glad that you joined us. So we have a really special guest with us in the studio right here in Southern Illinois. Where are we at? Southern Illinois. We're going to leave that in there.
We're there, yeah.
Southern Illinois today. Our guest today is Amber Capone. So, Amber, thank you so much for flying all the way across the country just to be here with us today. I know it wasn't quite exactly like that. So, Mother's Day wasn't too long ago. So, you dropped into good old Carterville, Illinois to see some family, right?
I did. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Yeah, Dave, you kind of put this idea in my mind whenever you asked me to do the podcast. And right before we were getting off the phone, you said, Mother's Day is coming up. And I had a conference in New York. Our son's birthday is today. And I thought, well, how in the world am I going to fit this in? But, of course, Mom and Grandma, they're more important than any of that. So yes. Here I am.
Awesome. That's so cool. So actually, I ran into you a little bit this morning. And just, you're hanging out in Carterville at Grandma's house on the front porch, having some coffee. How cool is that to get back to that slowed down pace?
It's so good. It's so good. And that was actually my mom's house. And that is our family's farmhouse. All that land my great-great-grandfather owned. And then my great-grandfather was the county milkman. And my grandfather was the milk hand, and so I grew up on that farm. It was retired at that time, but all that land has now been turned into a subdivision. But yeah, I go so that the pace of my life is so fast to sit on the front porch and drink coffee with my mom, and we didn't end up getting to see my grandma this morning, but I'll be on her front porch this afternoon.
Yeah, that's so cool. Every time we drive by that house, I told you, my wife is like, I want that house. If we ever build another house, we're going to copy the floor plans of that place and build it. It is such a cool country farmhouse. It is really, really neat. So a little backstory real quick about kind of how we have Amber here. So me and Amber, we're from the same town, good old Carterville, Illinois. Mm-hmm. We didn't quite grow up together, but we kind of ran in the same circles, went to the same school, the same high school, and here we are, and kind of watching you and Marcus on this journey with Vets, this nonprofit organization you guys started a few years back, and we're going to get into some of the details of that for sure later on, but really cool that we can have you come back home and visit and give us kind of an inside look, a little bit of kind of what you guys have going on. So, I want to get real quick to kind of a little bit of your history of kind of how this all started. So I know you met Marcus while he was playing football at SIU. And so like I said, we're not going to get into this whole real big life history detail like I was telling you before. If any of our viewers out there, if you're familiar with Marcus and Amber and what they're doing, or maybe if you're not, I highly encourage you to get on the old YouTubes and look up a couple episodes on there. One is Sean Ryan, his show, episode number 10. It's a detailed history about Marcus and all of his background. You can also check out Jocko Willink, his podcast. I think it's 351, where Amber and Marcus did a really big history of kind of their how everything got started and where they're from. And it's about a 5-hour-long podcast. I think it's a deep dive. Andy Stump has another one. Check out all the details on those if you really want the long backstory. But Amber, kind of what I want to talk about and get started today is more of your perspective of kind of the struggles that veterans go through, and not just veterans. It could be police officers. It could be anybody in a tough job. But you guys, tell me about early on. You guys got married when you were 17 or 18 years old.
We met when I was 17. Okay. And actually, I was still in high school. My dad recruited Marcus to play football at SIU because my dad was the head coach at the time. And my dad also played at SIU. And yes, we grew up in this teeny tiny hometown. Your dad was my biology teacher. One of my absolute favorites. So I met Marcus before my senior year, and I thought, I'll date him for a couple of weeks, whatever, Obviously, my dad was not going to be happy about that. So I did not think that we would stay together. But I also had never met anyone like him. And the second I met him, I was like, it's that's it. And so, we stayed together through my senior year. I changed my college plans. Instead of going to U of I, at University of Illinois, I switched and went to SIU where he was playing, and we stayed together. I was 2 years in, and he was graduating, and he decided he wanted to be in the Navy. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL, not because he wanted to be in the Navy, because he had always been part of a team. And so it was like, well, this is like the world's most elite team. And he's,
let's give it
like,
a shot.
Okay,
that's
check
for me,
that
right?
box. Yeah. So he decided to enlist in the Navy, and like 5 of my great uncles were World War II veterans. And so I always grew up with this reverence for our military, although I didn't fully understand it. And I just thought, the only stories that I've heard about the military were from really my great uncles, and one was a prisoner of war. He survived. 2 were killed in the war. 1 was killed in a plane crash. He was a pilot. He was killed in a training accident. And the other one survived as well. He was a doctor in the Navy in San Diego. And I just thought, that's a lot of, like, that's scary. That's not for me. And so we had actually decided to break up. And I found out that I was pregnant with our son. And so
Change plans. What did you think? So looking back, like in those very early days, the beginning, what did you think? How did you imagine your life was the journey was going to be? Like, what did you envision yourself doing 10 years or 20 years back then as you looked? Like, what were the possibilities? What did you think your life was going to look like back then?
Well, I was only 20. So at that time, I had no idea what my life would look like. I knew that I was going to have a baby, and there was no question about that. And I didn't know if that meant Marcus would or wouldn't be in my life, because he had this military aspiration that, I didn't understand. And there was no 9/11 at that time. This was 99, 2000. And so we actually spent a lot of my pregnancy apart. He was doing his internship in Florida. I was pregnant with our son, and I didn't know that we were going to make it.
How did you manage that? Like being pregnant, getting ready to, have a son, and Marcus being away for so long. How did you manage the tough part of that? Did you have family, friends, or did you have nothing really? Was it like super difficult? Like, how were you, managing through those rough waters?
Well, my family for sure, because I just have such a close-knit, big family here. So I moved from SIU back in with my grandparents, and we were just getting ready for this baby. I mean, he has still in their house a nursery. And I thought I would probably be a single mom and raise Caden there with them, stay in school. I was still in school. I was taking finals when I was 9 months pregnant. Today is Caden's birthday. So
happy birthday, Caden.
Yeah. So it was surreal. And because Marcus is like inherently so good, his parents had given him all kinds of grief about, you're too young, this is going to ruin your life. And ultimately he chose to do the right thing. And he reached out to me right before my spring break. This would have been, a couple months ago, 24 years ago. And he said, I can't do this. I've got to be in this baby's life. And I went to visit him. He proposed. Here comes Caden. We got married. Caden was 4 weeks old. And then he went into the Navy 4 weeks after that. And he finished up boot camp, went right to Coronado for SEAL training. I couldn't move at that time. I had to wait a bit. So we moved when Caden was almost one year old to Coronado, and he started SEAL training. And that was crazy. And in my mind, because I was still so young, I was 21, I thought we just have to get through this 6 months. Just get through SEAL training. Like, I know it's hard, and I know I have no idea what
this is.
The
rest of your life will be easy after
that.
Right?
Yes. In my mind, it was just the 6 months. He would come home on the weekends and not want to do anything. I've got photos of him laying on the couch with ice bags on his knees and Caden climbing on him. No one had a baby going through buds training,
right.
let alone, a wife and responsibilities.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So at this point in your life, and you look back at everything that you've been through from the beginning through kids, through all this stuff with Marcus, obviously life is not easy. Life can be very difficult. I think, and we've talked about this a lot before, so many people in today's culture want easy. They want the easy button. They want everything handed to them. They don't want, it's not like we want a hard life. We don't want struggles. But do you think that, all of the tough times in your life, did that make you a better person? Did it make you more resilient? Was there positive things to that? And, how do you think that shaped who you are today, the kind of the tough things you've been through?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It has instilled such resiliency in me. And luckily, because I'm from such an amazing family, and, the morals and values of a family were always so important to me. The tough times have just forged me, having that foundation plus the tough times, for sure. Yeah, I would highly recommend Tough Times.
I mean, it's so important. We look back in our lives, and you can't see it moving forward how it's going to benefit, but you look backwards and you connect the dots of how you got to here. And you're like, I wouldn't be here if this tough thing would not have happened to me.
Absolutely.
Or I wouldn't be here if I wouldn't have made the tough decision to do the hard thing. And so we've got to encourage everybody out there to not give up so easily in the tough time, or not to shy away from the tough decisions about certain things that are coming in your life, because that's really going to mold and shape who we are. And thank goodness we have those, and thank goodness we it helps to have the support, obviously, but a lot of it is just internal. You've got to make a decision for yourself, and hopefully from everybody out there hearing stories from you and the struggles you went through, that people can decide, I think I'm going to give this another day. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep pushing, because you do see the end results. You do see the positive. And, we are really trying to hammer that whole theme home with everybody we talk to all the time. I think it's cool how in your life, from watching, what you and Marcus are doing, it really seems like, your life experiences have made you like the CEO of Amber and Marcus and your relationship and your family. And you've got so many life experiences. So many people struggle like, well, I'm not going to college, or I'm not doing this thing that everybody expects me to, and so I'm not good enough. But man, the school of hard knocks, life experience is really where it's at. So as you and Marcus continue on this journey, 6 months goes by, everything's easy. I'm sure that's not really the case. But at some point, Marcus is probably gaining on deployments and is gone for long periods of time.
SEAL training is broken up into 2 different phases that are 6 months each. So it's a year. But the toughest part, well, I can't say this having never
physically
gone through.
My experience,
is buds training. So it's the initial 6 months where there's like this insane dropout rate. Like they start the class with the 200, they end with 19 or something. Well, he was one of the 19, and they graduated SEAL training in October of 2001. So 9/11 had just happened, and I think just looking back, there was so much naivete around what we had gotten ourselves into, but there was also just this need to quickly adapt. So it was like, the 6 months that was real.
Did you ever think early on, like, I'm not sure this is for me? Like, I don't know if this is going to work out, or was it just, what, I made this decision and we're going to forge ahead? My
dad always instilled in me this value of do not quit. And when I started dating Marcus, and then I got pregnant before we were married, he was not happy. And I thought, if anything, I'm going to hold on. I'm going to white knuckle this, because I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to disappoint him. And so I think that, along with just who I am as a person, my grandma, we're sitting on the porch yesterday, and she said, you have always just, you've always been this way. If there was something you wanted, you were going to get it, period, since you were a little girl. And so I think that those two things coupled together and this just insane love for Marcus, yes, I was not going to quit.
So do you think that you mentioned something about your father instilling this in you? How important was your resiliency in those things that your father instilled in you at a young age? Like, how important was that to build at a young age?
Very important. Very, very important. My dad, he's a football coach, so he didn't treat me like a football player, but he instilled a lot of those same lessons and values in me. And my parents were divorced, so I wasn't raised with him in my life on a daily basis, but he still stayed involved in my life in a way that, didn't feel like I have to put a check in the box, I have to go see my dad. It felt like, we had daddy-daughter dates. We had really in-depth conversations and open communication about, things that were going to be important in shaping me. And it was, I learned grit from my dad. I learned grace from my mom. And the two of those things together, I think, define me as a person.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool. You mentioned this a minute ago too. When you have parents like that you're just drawn so close to and that you love so much, you want to impress them. I remember as a kid, my parents would be gone at work and I'd want to like vacuum the floor or like do some dishes. And when they got home, I could not wait for them to say like, oh man, the place looks great. I was just, you yearn for that, attention and affection from people, especially, that you're really close to. And then it builds on top of that. And I think it's good for all of us. I don't know if you feel this way, but did you feel early on in the beginning, like your life had a purpose, like there was something bigger? Because in beginning, when me and Sheila first got married in 1993, we're just young kids, and we're like, oh, this will be fun. We'll have a family. It'll be okay for us to live together. All these things. But I wasn't really thinking big picture a whole lot, even though I was going to get into law enforcement, and I thought that was kind of cool. I was just in that for the the adrenaline aspect of it. I wasn't really thinking about it sounds kind of mean to say, but I wasn't thinking about helping little old ladies across the street. I just wanted to get in car chases and chase bad guys. Do you think it's important for people early on to figure out like why am I doing this, and what's my purpose? Is that important for people?
Absolutely. I think everyone should live their lives with this expectation that there is a bigger purpose. We're not just here. Now, it doesn't always make sense. Like, I feel like I was sidelined in the most beautiful way for 20 years where things did not make sense to me at all, because I went from being a college student to being a wife and a mother and supporting someone who would end up being gone about 300 days a year, whether it be training or deploying, for years. And then you get that person back and they're not the same. And then you're like, what is all this for? But for me, the biggest game changer has been surrender. And I am not a surrenderer. I am a type A, very methodical, strategic. I like to control my outcomes. And there were points in my life, two really marked points. The first one being when I got pregnant, and I thought, like, my life is over. Where I had to surrender and just trust God and trust that the right thing was going to happen, whether that be with or without Marcus. And then, of course, we were able to hold it together, keep our family together. And then the transition from military family life to civilian life was another point that I thought we're over. This is over. Marcus is over. We're over. Our family's over after all of this. And so then it was another point of complete surrender, and there's so much power in that surrender. Yeah. So I always felt like my life had purpose, but for 2 decades plus, it didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing to just have to sit back and like, I'm just going to trust this process, I guess, and we're going to keep moving forward. And I'm kind of the same way. If anybody wants to motivate me to do something, all you got to do is tell me there's no way you can do this. It's impossible. There's no way you're going to be good enough or whatever to do this. And then it's like, hold my drink for a second.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make sure this happens for sure.
Do you so you talked about surrender. Do you feel like it was in those 2 decades God was preparing you for that?
Yeah.
In that, I think that sometimes as human beings, we don't see that the down times, or what we think of the down times, is actually times of preparation.
Totally.
For those moments where God's going to push us into what He actually has planned for us.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that was really those 2 decades? You may have felt at the time it was wasted time, but now you look back. Hindsight's always 20/20.
Sure.
Do you
100%.
think that was really God just preparing you for that?
There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And there's also an element of obedience in that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would have been a lot easier in many ways to choose a different path. And out of an obedient heart, I didn't, because I never felt that was, I trust my gut. My gut for me is like the rudder of my life. And my gut never said to leave. It said the opposite. It had said to stay. But my mind was like, it doesn't make any sense to stay.
Yeah. Yep, that's cool. So what, if you go back in time, is there any, like if you could give advice to 22-year-old Amber with all the experience you have now and knowing what you know now, and not like giving away all the secrets of what's going to happen in your life, but what advice would you go back and give to your younger self, if any, as, some hints to help get through the next 20 years?
I don't know that I would necessarily give advice, because I think I was so true to what I was feeling, and it really was the right thing for me to. I would probably give myself a hug. I would probably give myself
Get ready, girl.
a pat on the back.
Yeah.
But I think that because I was so true to who I am, I don't have any regrets.
Yeah, I think if I had to give myself any advice, it would be just hang in there.
Yeah.
Just don't, like you said,
this.
don't give up. Things are going to be tough. And on a side note, a lot of us guys, cops, just manly men, we watch dudes like Marcus and we're like, I want to be a Navy SEAL too. I want to do that. Unfortunately for me, my body and cold water is just not a thing. Like water, I like water, but 55 degrees, no, it's unfortunately that would not have worked out so well for me. Ice baths, you still? We
have a cold plunge. No. Yeah, he like, I think he has
I don't know about that.
knack for self-torture, because he will push himself still, really? to points where, I don't know,
those things never get easy. It's just you learn how to deal with the suck a little bit better.
I guess. I get in there and I'm like, 5 seconds, I'm out.
No, I'm just going to listen to all you guys talk about it.
I started ice bathing last fall, so and I last couple of months I haven't done very many, but it is exhilarating.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So we're going to start kind of easing into, what you're doing now with vets and kind of how this is all worked out today. But at some point in your marriage and through all these deployments, I'm wondering, at what point did you see Marcus kind of start to change mentally a little bit? I know for a lot of guys, even for dudes in law enforcement, it's kind of a slow burn. It's not. Sometimes there's a catastrophic event. Maybe a close person gets killed or dies. For a lot of guys, though, it's just this slow grind over years and years and all of it. There's a change. It's not very obvious, but I'm curious, kind of what you started to see or what you had to deal with as far as the negative side of the career and all the crazy things he was doing. At some point, what did you kind of see that made you think, this might not be a good thing going on here?
The culture of the SEAL community, or probably any community that has to operate at a tempo like that, can be somewhat of a Greek tragedy. Like, what brings you together can also be your undoing. And so some of the things culturally were really challenging. Being on the road was really challenging. him fitting back in the house where, he was gone for 80-90% of the time was really challenging. And then there were things like, alcohol to cope with whatever, band-aiding with alcohol. And then this sort of like, if I say no to a trip, if I say no to a course, then people will think I'm a turd. And so you've got to, always be the yes man. And that comes at the expense of the family. And so, I was feeling feelings of resentment fairly early on, I would say. Well, I was so proud of him. Because, he was able to get through the training. In my mind, there was nothing that he could do. When he got to his first SEAL team, like, I wanted him to excel. And then, of course, 9/11 had happened. There was like this just righteous anger and aggression that I was feeling that was like, yes, get over there and just get after it. And I feel like in the beginning, the first 2 deployments or so, it wasn't horrible. He went to a different command, and those deployments were just like a different level. And so they were faster, they were shorter, but they were more intense. That's when I really started to notice issues. And then, he was losing friends all along the way, but he lost one of his best friends in 2007, 8. So he really started to change in 2008.
Yeah, one of the things, so I had a 29-year career in law enforcement, did a lot of SWAT stuff. I wasn't, a Navy SEAL by any means, but the community is still very similar.
Yeah.
A bunch of cops, a bunch of guys running around doing dude stuff, and the culture is nobody really talks about stuff. And so when I would come home, I felt personally it was very frustrating for me to come home and want to talk. My wife comes home, she wants to tell me everything, every butterfly that flew by the window. She can't wait to tell me. Me, on the other hand, I was just the opposite. I'd come home and I felt frustrated. Like, number one, you're not going to understand where I'm coming from. Right. You're not going to understand what I do. My job's complicated. You don't know the people. It's like, I felt like just to tell a basic story about something that happened was going to be just a mountain to climb.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you saw, was that something you saw where he didn't want to talk or communicate? Was that something sound familiar?
Yeah. And everyone can play nice. Like, he wasn't coming home every night. He was coming home. He'd be gone 4 weeks, home for 5 days, gone for 6 weeks, home for a week. It was very segmented like that. So anyone can play nice with guests in town for 5 days. And then it's like right back out the door.
Yeah. Did you ever ask him, like, how come you don't want to talk about this stuff? Or were there any conversations trying to work through that? Or was it like, well, if he doesn't want to say anything, I guess
the tempo of war is just difficult to describe, because you want to, we were losing so many friends. So many of my girlfriends are widows that it felt like you've got to really savor every second. You don't want to talk about things that are too heavy. You can put on a happy face for days at a time and then know that, like, right back out the door, he may not come home again. Yeah. So it's difficult to, like, really get into the nitty gritty, because he also had to stay in a mindset that was always ready to deploy. And so it was actually at some point more difficult for him to be home than it was for him to be downrange.
Because you have to switch off that warrior.
Yeah.
Like you can't be in full-blown war mode when you're at home with your wife and kids.
Right.
And I think that's probably one of the most difficult things for warriors to do, is to come home, especially if you're home for a little bit, off for a little bit, and that kind of thing. Managing that is probably
I'm sure
the
it's
biggest
exhausting. I think someone said, like, I was kicking in a front door, and then one day, then 48 hours later, I was watching my son kick a soccer ball down the field. Like, it's just such a juxtaposition. So it became easier for him to stay in that, like, war mindset. And, at some point, it's like you don't even try to play anymore. You don't even try to play the part. You just are existing. And then, of course, there's resentment on the part of the spouse. But then you're also doing it for the greater good. But then you're like, how much longer do we have to do this? This is going to have repercussions. It's almost like surviving a storm you don't really ask questions or talk about it if a tornado is coming. Like, you're just trying to get to shelter and survive it. It's easier to survive it than it is to survey the damage once the storm is gone.
That's got to be so. I never really thought about it that way. With every moment, it's like, we can't mess this moment up.
Right.
Because we've got 4 hours before this person's leaving to go somewhere else. And I want his mind to be right. I don't want to make him mad. I don't want to,
right.
So that's it's like walking on eggshells for a long time.
Yeah.
I can imagine. And I'm sure the Navy and a lot of military units, I bet their dream operator is probably a single dude with no kids. I mean, that has to be what they really, really want, because a wife and kids and family, all of a sudden your mind is maybe off somewhere else. And even if your mind is on the job, then the family is going to pay a huge price.
Yeah.
A huge price for what they're going to get afterwards. I mean, that's a tough.
No one was prepared for not only the war, but how to support the war fighter. Not just whenever they get out, but during those deployment cycles, they were trying different things. Like, well, let's try to do a decompression stop in Germany. Well, then all the spouses were like, no, but I want to see my husband.
You're taking away 3 days from me,
right?
Yeah.
And then the guys would just go and get tanked in Germany, and then they'd come home. It was so bad.
Did you see any of the war poking through when he was at home? Just like that constant on switch. Did you ever see that poke through when he was home?
I would say the interesting thing about Marcus and his, like, the community, SEAL community in general, is that they're really effective at compartmentalizing, almost to a point where it's kind of scary if you think about it, that you could be two different people, live two different lives. And really I never thought about what Marcus did on deployment.
Don't want to.
I don't want, right. And it never really occurred to me. He's never told me a war story. He's told me a couple of things, but no, I mean, I didn't see it. And I think that, I started to see things that were concerning for sure. But it wasn't like he was hypervigilant or he was, jumpy. It wasn't.
So who was your support? You said you had a lot of friends, a lot of other guys that were deployed, and you were friends with their wives. And was it helpful for you to get on the phone and call mom or talk to one of your best friends, or what did you do to help your mental state to kind of get through that? How did you process that?
Well, for one thing, I would come back here every time he was gone for more than 2 weeks. So, Virginia Beach is 14 hours, 13 hours directly on 64. It'll take you right into Norfolk, Virginia. So I came home a lot, and then it occurred to me that, I can't do this forever. Caden at that time was maybe 4, and he was going to start kindergarten the following year. We just needed some stability. And so I went through a period of time where I had to force myself to just do the uncomfortable thing. I was afraid to stay at home alone at night. I don't know why, but it was just this irrational fear that I had to overcome. And I had like panic attacks. I would stay awake all night. I don't know why I was so afraid, because it's not a problem at all now, but I just forced myself to get over that. And then I really leaned into the wives community, which I, also feel has pluses and minuses. There were spouses that were really, really jaded and really difficult to be around because they had so much animosity towards their husband.
They could almost talk you into giving up, maybe.
Right.
Yeah,
and then there were very competitive spouses, like, well, has your husband been to such and such course? Because mine has. And then there were spouses that were just absolute rocks. Yeah. And I thought, I want to be like them. So Marcus's Master Chief's wife kind of took me under her wing when I was going through this period, and she might not have even known it. She wasn't trying to mentor me, but I just looked up to her a lot, and I thought she just has a lot of grace, and she doesn't ever talk bad about her husband, and she's a leader, and I just gravitate towards leaders. Yeah. And
I mean, that's so critical. You need to surround yourself. and I'm not sure if this was, I'm not saying this, but we need to try and surround ourselves with people that we think are better than us.
Yeah.
Instead of hanging out with the people that we know are not anywhere near us, are going to drag us down just for convenience or whatever it is. So look for those people that you can spend time with, and you don't have to call them a mentor necessarily, but you know that's what they are.
Yeah.
And you know, and it raises your level of, I don't want to say necessarily performance, but all of a sudden you're around better people and you become a better person. You learn from them. They can teach you things. That is absolutely critical, that everybody needs to step up their game of who they surround themselves with. The most professional stand-up people we possibly can. And next thing you know, somebody's going to notice you and want to be around you, and you can start being that for somebody else. So I'm just curious, is there anything going on in the military now that, does the military provide any type of, I don't know if counseling is the right word, but surely they know, especially like in the SEAL community, like this is going to be tough for families. Or is it just all the wives on their own to figure this stuff out? You would think there would be some programs in place.
They put programs in place over the years, but there certainly was not anything that existed when we really needed it most. There were wives gatherings and things like that, but it was also there. They were as bad as they were good. Now I think that they have put programs in place that help support the families, but this has all been like adaptation, learn on the go, try this, try that, and it still probably has a ways to go, because this is still a very taboo topic. You want everyone to think like the SEAL community works. It is so interesting to me how it works, because you have individuals who are very high performers, and obviously they can overcome incredible adversity to earn their trident. But it's like, what caused that adversity? There was something, there was some kind of, I don't know, something geared them to be this way. And then you get a bunch of high performers together, and the way that you sort of stay in the pack is to fit in, but you also want to lead. So there's like all these weird dynamics of like, how do you fit in but also lead? And then where do the wives fall in?
Yeah,
there's a hierarchy.
Yeah, it's almost, I feel like there needs to be one of the courses the SEALs want to go to is like, there needs to be like a family, like here's how you're going to rock this relationship out with your family. And that needs to be a priority, just like going to breaching school or going to, some underwater demolition thing or whatever really cool class you think you're going to go to. There needs to be one, like, how are we going to manage home life? How are we going to manage? How are you going to deal with your wife, your spouse, whatever? Because having the confidence of knowing that things are good at home, it unleashes you to perform on a crazy level everywhere else, knowing that you've got that confidence behind you.
Yeah, and I think what has to happen is, the spouse really needs to feel that support from both the community and from their partner. I felt like, I don't know, you start to feel very insecure, I think, at some point where, you're really sacrificing your family for the greater good, but is the greater good worth it? And, this is a constant question.
Man, that's
delicate balance.
Yeah, that's definitely a battle. So somewhere around 2013 or so, as Marcus is getting out of the SEAL teams and I guess is getting medically retired.
Yeah, he did 7 tours, 6 of them combat tours over a period of 10 years. And so he was burnt out and had lost a lot of friends, had a couple of close calls himself, and I think he just needed a break. There was also no brake system built in. Like, you have to stay on the bullet train. If you get off, you might not get back on.
Yeah.
And so
it's like the Tom Brady effect. If the quarterback in front of you gets hurt and the new one comes in, like, the old one's probably never coming back.
Nope.
So they're probably definitely not wanting to miss out.
Yeah. So, you just like shelve things, you keep going, you white knuckling, because you also can't talk about this. If you share with you leadership or teammates or whatever that you're struggling, then you run the risk of like being pulled off the line. Yeah. And so then, what would you do then? Because you've got this pack mentality. Now you fall into the back of the pack. Like, you're trying to lead the pack, so you just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And then stuff's falling apart behind closed doors, and the spouse is like, do something. But Marcus was like, I can't do anything.
Yeah. One of the dilemmas I had in law enforcement was, there's, you have close calls there at work too.
Sure.
And not only just with yourself, but things that are happening in the town, maybe around your neighborhood. There was a lot of things I didn't tell Sheila because I knew if I did, like, it would worry her to death.
Right.
I'm sure Marcus didn't come home and say,
for sure,
I almost got killed 7 times on this one. We're going back in 6 months. I mean, you can't as a husband really talk about that stuff because but what it's going to possibly do. But on the other hand, it is important to talk about that stuff, so it's so difficult. I can't imagine, how a lot of the guys like Marcus and you wade through those things. But so 2013, he's getting out, and I'm guessing all of a sudden,
I think 2010 was a turning point because he left the command knowing that he may never get back there. That was a huge thing for him, and that command went on to kill bin Laden, which he would have been support for that. Like, one of the squadrons was carried out the mission, but his squadron supported it. So then he was like, I would have been there. Like, what am I doing here? I'm a BUDS instructor. He hated it. I hated being away from Virginia Beach. I hated being away from my friends because by that point I had a really, really close-knit community of friends. Our kids were 10 and 8 at that time, and life was okay. It was dysfunctional, but it was okay. We moved to California. He became a BUDS instructor. We were home together all the time. He didn't know how to be a husband. He didn't know how to be a dad. He didn't know how to not have his tight-knit community. And so it was like, oh, this is what it is. In my mind, I think if anything, I would tell myself, going back to your previous question, like, don't be so naive, but also that naivete kind of patted me from how harsh things really were. I thought he would leave the command and we would go to California and like skip down the street. I thought it would just be normal because, we needed time with him.
Did he have plans of doing that type of work, a job like instructor stuff, for a long time? Was he trying to look into some other type of career, or kind of what was he thinking about trying to do?
What actually got us to California was a 2-day stint at officer candidate school. So he was basically called out by his commander at that command and said, I think you would be a great officer candidate. Marcus is a natural leader. He was a quarterback. He's not making the game plan, but he's executing it. And so he was basically selected to go to officer candidate school, but it was on the heels of his 7th deployment. Like, his mind mentally, he needed a break. He didn't need to go back to basically boot camp. So it was that. It was like, making your bed, tight corners, all the kind of BS.
Stuff that you mentally break down to.
Yeah, there were like 22-year-olds just out of college that were also in the course. And so, here he is, this SEAL Team 6 guy, like, coming back from his...
Yeah.
He left 2 weeks.
You need to come over here and make my bed.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, they were supposed to read some book or something, and he said he was sitting on the floor, and he was holding the book, and he just threw it across the room. And he was like, where's instructor so-and-so? And they were like, you can't talk to him. Like, don't go find him or something. And he was like, no, I'm out of here. And they knew that he was probably in the wrong place. And so he had already left the command at that point. And it was like, obviously we needed a break. And so we went to California. He became an instructor. The wheels really started to come off. Bin Laden raid happened. We were going to go back. Like, we didn't know how to be a normal family. I didn't know what normal families did on the weekends. I knew how to survive a war deployment. I knew how to be a single mom. So it was like rushing back into that felt safer, weirdly. Mm-hmm. And then the helicopter crashed and killed 31 SEALs, like an entire squadron, more or less. A lot of his friends, our friends, were on that helicopter. And at that point, it's like, why would we go back into that? And he's like, I'm just going to get out. I can't be an instructor. I'm not going to go back to the regular teams. I'm done.
Yeah. Did he have any idea of anything else he wanted to do outside of the military?
The exact opposite, so he thought, of what he'd been doing. So he's like, I never want to carry a weapon again. I don't want to be a hired gun. I don't care if I ever pick up a weapon again.
Yeah.
He went into investment banking.
Yeah. You see a lot of guys, tactical dudes, are like, I'm going to get out of the military and I'll be a firearms instructor, or I'll be, whatever. And I guess he was like, just wanted to completely get away from everything that kind of looked like what he used to do.
Totally. He wasn't dealing with if he was like hitting the release valve between deployment cycles, or had an outlet that was healthy besides drinking, that was adding more shame and guilt. And, he was like band-aiding with things that were causing more grief. And so I think in his mind, it was like, well, I'm just going to completely turn another direction and I'm never going to think about that again.
Yeah. So now you're getting into the phase of life where you're starting to see some real struggles.
Yeah.
With Marcus, and it sounds like you're like the research CEO of the universe, trying to figure out what's going on and what to do. And it seems like it was probably pretty frustrating trying to figure out, how can you get Marcus back to normal?
Yeah.
And eventually you, after trying all kinds of different things, I don't know how you exactly stumbled onto it or found out about psychedelic assisted therapy, but at some point you figure out this might be the next step or the next thing. So when did that happen, and kind of how did that start?
He was working at Merrill Lynch in Beverly Hills. I mean, you cannot get any more opposite than that.
Wearing a suit every day. And
sitting in traffic for 2.5 hours at night. Like, it was the exact opposite, and it was what he thought he wanted, and it was exactly the opposite of what he needed. My dad had just been named offensive coordinator at University of Texas, and I thought, we're never going to survive this, and I don't want to get a divorce in California because, I can't afford to live in this state as a single mom. It is very difficult to take your kids across state lines. I thought, I've got to get to Texas. And so we moved to Texas, and that's when the wheels really, really, really came off. And, he was under care at the VA. He had seen psychologists. He was actually put on medication a few years prior to that, antidepressants. And then, that would prompt another prescription and a side effect and switch it and up it. And he was on this medication roller coaster for years. And, he was miserable. He was miserable in the teams at the end. He was miserable in civilian life. He was miserable in Texas. And so I could see in his mind that suicide was an option. And I was desperate to help him, but I was also exhausted myself. Mm-hmm. And so, how did this all go down? He was drinking more. We were more disconnected than ever. From the outside, it looked like we had everything, beautiful home on a golf course and kids that were athletic and happy. And behind closed doors, we were absolutely falling apart. He had talked to counselors, therapists, whatever, but, the VA rotation system, you never have anyone for very long. And so he was kind of like, why am I doing this? The medications are, out of control. There were 10. And so one of his friends took his life, and his wife had his brain autopsied. And the Virginian Pilot did an article, a 2-part series on his brain findings. And it was the first time that I'd ever heard about interface astroglial scarring, or CTE, which is they're both degenerative brain conditions, one caused by blast waves, the other caused by concussions or subconcussive events. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this totally makes sense. He has, between football and breaching and the SEAL teams, he's got almost 30 years of head trauma. And so then I started getting him into brain clinics and, you know, flipping upside down in chairs and oxygen therapy and magnets and all this. And like nothing was working. He was getting more and more frustrated and more just despondent and hopeless that, you know, I felt like I was watching the end of everything daily. I would catch him like staring out the window and say like, help me understand so I can try to help you. What are you feeling? And he would say, I'm feeling just how much better your life would be without me. And I'm feeling like I can't live like this for another 40 years. He was like 40. And so I just thought we need a Hail Mary. I had actually decided to leave him. I'd gone to visit him at a brain clinic, and it was worse than ever. I was actually scared. Like, I was scared for him. I was scared of him. And I didn't even tell him I was leaving. I got in an Uber while he was getting his magnetic stimulation on the brain. And I went to the airport and I flew home. My mom and grandma were there with my kids. It was my dad's birthday. So I called my dad on his birthday and I said, this is it. I'm so sorry, Dad. I've never wanted to disappoint you, but I have to quit. I have to quit. Like, it's not healthy anymore. And he's like, okay, you know, that's totally fine. What do you need from me? And what does Marcus need? And I said, Marcus is beyond anything that we can do for him. And I think he will be dead in 3 to 5 years. So I'm just trying to like come to terms with that. I'm trying to forgive myself for that, because I've kind of like used everything available to me and I don't have any hope left. And then I was sitting with that and just knowing that like my kids would be stuck with that. They would live with the legacy of losing their dad for the rest of their lives. And like, had I really tried everything?
That's tough.
Yeah, that's such a compelling. I can imagine that Marcus going to these treatments, I'm sure did he felt like he was just getting drugged along, like being like, okay, whatever.
Great for diagnostics, not great for long-term solutions.
Right, for moving forward.
Yeah.
So eventually we find out about some psychedelic assisted therapy.
Which I didn't even know that's what it was at the time, honestly.
How did you find out about it?
One of his friends who knew that we were struggling had suggested it. He had tried it. He said it was life-changing. And he was a SEAL. He was someone that we love and respect a lot. And so I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what it was, what psychedelics were. I didn't know anything. And so the one thing I did know was that I trusted this guy. And he thought it would help. And so I'd approached Marcus about it a year prior, and he was like, absolutely not. It's drugs. It's crazy. It's Mexico. We live in the most advanced country in the world with the best healthcare system known to man. What could I get? What could I get there that I can't get here? Yeah. And then it became, we came to a point where I was terrified. And that was like the other surrender point in my life where I was out of everything. I was out of options. I was out of energy. I was out of everything. And I had started seeing a therapist who was the one woman who took my insurance in the entire area. And she happened to be a Christian therapist. And so I thought that therapy was sitting down and having like 1 hour to play the victim, really, is what it boiled down to. Like, these are all the things. Can you believe he did this? Da-da-da-da-da. And she was like, my first session, she's like, this is your one session to just get it all out. Because next session going forward, this is not about your husband. He's not here. You're here. This is about you. And so I thought, okay, I like her. She's going to hold me accountable. I've never had this before, but I can appreciate her energy because, she was very direct. And she gave me assignments every week. And the first assignment was go get a journal and start reading your Bible and just writing down verses that speak to you. And so I did that. And she also took me through exercises that, were like, describe the state of your life, describe this area, that area, this, are you fulfilled here? Are you fulfilled there? And it was just hopeless. It was like, use words to describe your life. And it was like anger, resentment, frustration, despair, depression, hopelessness. It was just bad. But I started working every week and doing what she told me to do and focusing on me. And then I became just absolutely obsessed with this period of time that I would take every morning. It was like I would just show up for myself with my Bible, with my prayer journal, and I would just sit in complete surrender. And I would, instead of like searching my Bible for things that were speaking to me, it became like sitting and seeing what came to me naturally. And what would come to me were things that were like, pain points of my own life, things that I hadn't dealt with or that I was carrying, like even unknowingly, the anger, the resentment, the hardened heart, being afraid to be open, being afraid to love or be loved because, you're just so, you put up walls for protection, just the ego, like that hurt. I will never be hurt like that again.
Yeah.
And breaking down those walls is what I was doing for a period of time that my life was actually spiraling further and further out of control. But I had kind of become like the eye of the storm. And I was so clear.
Yeah. Was it encouraging? Was it motivating that finally, for maybe the first time ever in your life, you were taking specific time for you?
Yeah.
So like, I'm going to work on me and what I have. Like, was that like
totally?
That's got to be a complete 180, first of all.
Yeah.
And then probably pretty motivating experience, I would imagine.
Yeah. My life had been lived that far in like defensive mode. Like I'm responding, I'm reacting. I'm not like proactively putting in the work or taking accountability or ownership of things that are hard to think about or talk about or own. And so during that time, which was very intentional. It looked different every day, but I would show up every day. I would show up with my coffee, my Bible, my prayer journal, and no time. But I had nothing to lose. Like my life was in the complete gutter. Our finances were a mess. We had a roof over our head, but that's about it. Mm-hmm. It was the future was bleak. It was just like, okay, here I am. I'm showing up again. Like, what do you want me to hear, God? What do you want to deal with me on today? And so sometimes I would cry. Sometimes I would sit there and nothing would happen. Sometimes I was so overcome with joy. It is the most precious thing to me to sit in that sort of intention because I was raised in church. I was raised with a family that is very, very faith-based, and yet I didn't know my own personal relationship with God looked like. Of course, there was the time where I got pregnant that I remember being in my car and just like screaming at the top of my lungs and just driving through the Crab Orchard Refuge and being like, just like letting all this anger and emotion and frustration and uncertainty out, and then having this overwhelming peace of like, God's in control. Always trust that. This time it felt like, now we have kids. Now we have a family and responsibilities and finances and things that, a 20-year-old driving in a car through the refuge mm-hmm. didn't have. So there's like everything's on the line now. But I was learning that peace and surrender every morning when I would show up for myself.
Yeah, that's you hit rock bottom. They call that in AA or any kind of 12-step program. You have to hit rock bottom before you can move up. And it sounds like that was about the moment that you hit that point where it was like, okay, I've got nothing else. I've clawed and I fought and I've tried to do all of this stuff in my own strength.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to give it to you
100%.
and surrender. And
100%.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to fast forward a little bit through some of the details about exactly the therapy and exactly what that is. But eventually Marcus goes to Mexico.
Yeah. And as I'm like going through my own sort of like healing in this 1 year, I would say period, it was kind of like down, rock bottom. And then on the way back up, I was getting like during my quiet time, I was getting like full visions and just full confirmation of what I am doing today. I've written about it years ago, but it made no sense because like I didn't think Marcus would be alive. So I'm like, how am I seeing these things? How am I feeling these things that feel like the last thing that would ever happen right now? And so I was able to convince him to go sort of as an ultimatum. But because I was doing that work on myself, my own heart was becoming softened. And I was able to approach him from a place of love. And what ended up working with him was ditching my guilt, shame, anger, condemnation, all of the things that he was already feeling about himself, which would only put him into defensive mode and basically guarantee that I was going to create the outcome that I was trying to avoid and also trying to protect my own self. And I approached him in love and I said, I will fight for you every day for the rest of my life, but you have to fight with me. I will never leave you, but you have to fight with me. And he just like completely caved. And he was like, okay, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, it's almost like God's grace in a sense. Like people are expecting condemnation. They're expecting punishment. They're expecting, and then all of a sudden they get the opposite. Yeah. It's incredibly moving, and people relate to that. And we see it, how God treats people. And that's how we're supposed to treat people. Yeah. And all of a sudden you see amazing turnaround and results with that for sure.
Yeah, so when you embrace God, you become more like him, and that shines through. So that's what you were becoming for Marcus. Yeah. That opposite of what you had been, that opposite of what your relationship had been. You were almost like that warm blanket wrapping around him saying, hey, I'm here with you. And I've got it.
Yeah, and to think back and think, how bad things had become, and how soft my heart had become, and how full of grace I had become. I just like that is only God, because I wasn't capable of that on my own. Yeah. But that's exactly what I showed him, and that's exactly what worked. And ultimately he did go to Mexico to do this treatment that the friend had told us about, which we knew nothing about. I didn't care. He started to do the research and he was like, this is crazy. But there is a lot of research that corroborates, this sort of treatment, and there are all kinds of promising research that had been going on in the 50s and 60s. And then, of course, these substances were totally abused as recreational drugs, and all the research was shut down. But there are clinics operating around the world, or retreats operating around the world, where they're either legal or unregulated, and that is the case with Mexico and Ibogaine. And so he went. I went the following day because I gave him my word that I would go, and I dropped him off at the airport. I thought, this is it. Like, it's all on the table now. At least I know that I've tried everything. If it doesn't work, then I'm no better. I'm no worse off than I was before. Right. And so I had hoped that it would work. I went to see him the next day, and I was just overcome with this gripping fear of I can't see him, because as soon as I see him, I'm going to know, and I don't want to be disappointed.
Did you think he was going to be mad, like, this is something else, this didn't work either, and you sent me down here for no reason?
I thought it could be that. I thought that it could change him and be, like, super weird. I didn't know. I had like almost this fear around my faith of like, what have we done? But when you are so desperate to save someone that you love, like, you will consider anything. And I just wanted to keep him alive. I wanted my kids to have a father. I wanted my marriage to work. So I was willing to try anything. But then after the fact, when it's done, you can't go back. I found myself having like an oh no moment where my faith actually made me doubt that this was good or that this would work. But as soon as I saw him, it was literally like being reunited with the guy that I met
Was it just the look? Was it? You say you trust your gut, and you know just what your gut is telling you. But what was it about him in that moment that you knew something was different?
His entire demeanor was exactly the way that I remembered him when I met him. Like I mentioned before, I had never met anyone like him. The feeling that he made me feel from the second that I met him was just, he is so special. And that feeling was back. But that feeling I hadn't felt for so long, because he had kind of like become a monster in many ways. His energy was very, very bad. It was like, very negative, very difficult to be around. And he just, I don't know, it was him again.
Yeah, it's so cool. And if anybody watching does any bit of research on this, you're going to be floored. And I know I've got a friend of mine that's done this treatment. And after he explained to me, that a lot of people react differently to this treatment. So you don't know exactly what you're going to get. But there's a common theme, it seems like, where guys get done with this and all of a sudden their perspective, for some reason their perspective is different. They see the world differently, from a different place. And a lot of that involves some form of a meeting with God in one way or another, or they saw things from the perspective of God, or they saw things. There's definitely a faith component to this that happens to people. And I know the buddy of mine, it was very dramatic in the same way, coming out of this treatment, it's like people are given a second chance. It's almost like they got to rewind their life. Yeah. They were going over the falls, and they really got a second chance to do this over, and they realize how close things were, and like they got to see themselves in a movie or whatever. And it's very curious. We kind of see it in the law enforcement aspect. People that are on, some wild, crazy drugs, sometimes they start talking about, Jesus or the devil, and it's always a negative thing. But in this treatment, under the supervision of doctors and healthcare providers and all this stuff, there is this component of where people realize, and a lot of it is based on faith, kind of where they are. They see the true perspective of where they're at, and it motivates them to get on the right track and not mess this up. Yeah. And I know we talked about this before, and there's some research going on about kind of what people experience in this, and kind of how faith plays a part in this whole treatment process.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. We're actually collecting the data now and hoping to partner with a very reputable research institution to publish the data, because we are seeing that week in and week out. And it doesn't necessarily mean that someone will emerge from this treatment and say, I'm ready to give my life to Christ. It more often times than not, yes, but atheists, agnostics, they come through and they're like, I don't know what this means, but I know that there's more to know. I know that there's something worth looking into. And so then they, start the path. But yeah, this treatment in particular is really effective at creating a perspective shift on someone's life or circumstances, in a way that gets them out of the stories that they've been telling themselves. For someone that's experienced severe childhood trauma, they might have internalized that as being their fault, or somehow not being able to stand up for themselves or whatever. And, they have a perspective shift that completely rewrites the narrative that they've incorrectly told themselves for decades. It's very common to see 50-plus-year-old, very hardened special operations veterans emerge from these treatments dealing with very early childhood trauma, and then all of the other decades worth of trauma that they picked up because of the story that they started telling themselves at 5. And so, there's this rewiring, evaluating of life memories or experiences, but then there's also this reconnection. So what's happening on both the physiological, psychological, and spiritual level has this perfect collision of effectiveness in terms of dealing with the past trauma. It's really actually very great for brain trauma too. We just published a paper. We didn't, but Stanford did, on VETS grant recipients who did ibogaine therapy and the changes in the brain. Per the lead author, science has never seen this before. So it's very effective for anyone who's experienced traumatic brain injury. More research to come on that. But then there's this connection that I don't think science will ever be able to fully adequately explain. So it's like, when someone reemerges with this feeling of wanting to be connected to their families, themselves, their purpose, God, nature, it starts the wheels in motion for a life that has, only disconnection and no feeling of purpose, to like, okay, there's something here.
Yeah, it's literally amazing. And some of the stories I've heard of people that have gone through this treatment, and some of the, the visions that they experience and things they see, dealing with childhood trauma, is just absolutely mind blowing. And this does a really good job, like you said, of kind of resetting everything in the right direction. But moving forward beyond the treatment, what is a good way for people to continue? Obviously, there's got to be a path beyond just the treatment. And so what are some good things to support these guys? What can families do, wives, spouses, to support after the treatment? Like, what are some things that you guys encourage afterwards?
Well, first of all, I would say for anyone approaching an experience like this, or just wanting to get their life back in general, like, the commitment is the number one thing. We have guys that contact us and they're like, I don't know, my buddy said to do it, or I don't know anything about this, but I'll try anything. I've tried everything. And those really aren't the individuals that will have the greatest likelihood of success. The greatest likelihood of success comes whenever someone has done their due diligence and knows, that this is something that they can commit to, not just for a 5-day period of being in Mexico, but indefinitely for the rest of their lives. And this is something that's been really difficult, I think, for Marcus to comprehend, because he is so goal oriented, like, achieve the objective, move on. And there really is no finish line here. It's just a new way of being, a new way of thinking. It's constantly evolving from, patterns that are no longer serving the person. I think another thing that's really important is that when an individual decides to get on this sort of like healing journey, that the people in their lives, primarily the spouse, are very supportive. This would not have worked if I was on my own healing journey, which I had been for a year before Marcus did his, and then we weren't working on our relationship together. So we're sort of like growing together, but from very individual paths. Yeah. And ultimately, like, are psychedelic therapies the answer? No, not in my mind. They're not. They're a great tool. And what they're doing in the brain is down-regulating activity in a region called the default mode network. And that's more or less our body's ability to repress emotion. So, something from childhood, something from war, whatever. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. It doesn't bother me. When subconsciously, like, it probably does. And especially if the trauma is mounting, and, like, guys like Marcus are really great at compartmentalizing, that's like going somewhere. There's a balance being kept somewhere. And so this allows all of this trauma to surface, and it comes out in ways that, are really unusual, maybe for the Western medical system, but probably far more effective than band-aiding it with an SSRI, which causes, another prescription need and another. And pretty soon you just have a zombie full of pharmaceuticals. The pharmaceutical industry is killing citizens of the United States,
no doubt,
for a number of reasons. Almost everyone that comes through the VETS program is or has been on an SSRI and never goes back on it again. Now, that there are obviously exceptions, like that's not necessarily expected, but it's just what we're observing is that pharmaceuticals, no more. But they're able to really tap in and live instead of just existing. And they're doing that by, putting the work in through quiet time, meditation, healthy activities. Like, Marcus was able to sleep better, so then he was up earlier. Then he started working out, which made him want to eat better and take supplements. And then, like, that snowball effect really starts to take hold in the lives of those who are coming through our program.
Do you think that, I don't know what the possibility of this being legalized? Because is it legalized at this point in the United States, or is it still?
Most of them are illegal.
Yeah.
Most of them are Schedule 1.
So my question would be, we just talked about pharmaceutical, and this is more or less a treatment that you get one time or a couple of times, correct?
Yeah.
And it's like a one-time thing. So do you think that really the pharmaceutical companies are interested in making money off of people?
This is a direct threat to the profit model of the pharmaceutical companies.
That's what I was going to say, because they can get somebody on SSRI and they can be on that for the rest of their life and be numb to the world.
Yep.
Whereas this one-shot thing, and you can really come out a different person. You can come out the person you want to be with the work.
Yeah.
And so to me, that seems like the reason that it's not legalized is probably because it's too effective and it's going to affect the bottom line of the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, I think the way that this should go, the way that Vets is advocating for this to go anyway, is through medicalization and the FDA route. So if these are prescribable treatments for PTSD, TBI, depression, anxiety, whatever, that's very different than having a decriminalized or a rescheduling type approach. We do not advocate for rescheduling or decriminalization or entheogenic churches. We think it's all garbage, because these are very, very powerful substances that should be medically screened and given under intense medical supervision. So yes, that is happening. MDMA is currently in phase 3 FDA clinical trials for the treatment of PTSD. Psilocybin is a bit behind that for treatment-resistant depression. We're hoping that we can do something with ibogaine for traumatic brain injury because the data is so compelling. So, I think that is probably the way that they'll be accessible in the U.S. But, there are retreats happening all over the world that are providing, more, I would say, less medicalization type experiences.
Yeah, awesome. So we've said this phrase a few times. So if you're brand new and haven't a clue what we're talking about, VETS is an acronym that stands for Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, right?
Yep.
So you guys are trying to, get this whole process moving in America. Might be one of your top goals. But what can people do to kind of help out the VETS organization? What can they do to support you guys and help keep this moving forward?
So the foundation of the SEAL community is taking care of one another. There's such a tight knit, the guys call it the brotherhood. And the very first thing that Marcus said to me when he came out of his treatment and I saw him that first time was, "This is it. This is exactly what the guys need." Now, we didn't know that this would become what it has become today. It was really just more of a goal of paying it forward to our friends, which became their friends and their friends' friends, and then support personnel and all of Naval Special Warfare. Now it's all special operations, and we do serve veterans that are not special operations as much as we possibly can. The only way to actively, effectively scale this based on the demand is through legislative change. VETS exists to provide that frontline support right now to veterans who are struggling, but we're collecting data on those veterans and plugging them into studies that are happening across the United States, so that we can use the method of effective storytelling alongside science to really, really push for change. We're working at the state level, federal level, really, and just unlocking research dollars for veterans to be able to be studied. They're a population that could significantly benefit from therapies that work. I think that when you have a veteran suicide statistic that still lingers around 20 per day and has not changed and is very underreported, that's staggering. It is. I don't know that it's possible to end the veteran suicide epidemic, but we can certainly go a long way in reducing this statistic.
Well, and I will say, I know firsthand that what you guys are doing is saving lives. You will probably attest to Marcus yourself as example number one. I personally know people that if they hadn't have gone through this treatment through you guys, that's where they would have ended up. So I know 100% that it is helping that number, whatever small amount you want to call it, it is helping that number. And so I hope that continues to drive, your purpose and why you're doing things and how you're helping out, not just the SEAL community, but, this is kind of going beyond that a little bit as well.
For sure.
And hopefully, we see that, available in through the research. And so this is not just, for a couple people over here. This is going to be available to everybody that needs it, for sure. So good. I mean, this is, where can guys and girls, financially help donate to your foundation, or how can they help in that way?
We're 100% donor dependent, and so vetsolutions.org is our website, and donations of any size certainly help us reach veterans today, but also advocate and pave the way for all veterans to receive access to these therapies in the years ahead. Awesome. Definitely everybody help out with that. So Amber, I know this is, taking a big chunk out of your time. I know you're busy, Washington, D.C. and state capitals and all these, governors and important people you guys are meeting with, and we appreciate it. We appreciate the time and effort you guys are putting in to this. It is very critical to help save lives, and you guys are doing a wonderful job. Glad to see you back in Carterville, to visit the old hometown every once in a while, and hopefully we can meet up again and kind of, do some updates later on and continue putting this information out to everybody that needs it. So thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about sort of like what makes me tick. And I think Marcus and I together are a very effective duo, but because I'm from here, because I have the values of family and grit and determination, and most importantly, because of the foundation of faith that was established because I'm from here, I think is why this is a God thing. Like I said at our gala last year, the verse of the Bible that I don't know which verse it is off the top of my head, unfortunately, but it's like when people look at you or look at a situation and they go like, well, that's only God. That's like the only thing that is not humanly possible. That's how I feel about vets. It's like, we are 5 years old, not even, we'll be 5 years old at the end of May, where we, filed our 501c3 application. We received our designation in 2020. For an organization to be this young and this scrappy and have this much success, I hope indicates that it is God. And at the end of all of this, like to what I said earlier, it's not psychedelics. Like psychedelics are a tool and they're really effective. But I feel like everyone has a God-sized hole in their heart that only God can fill.
Absolutely.
Yep. And so many people try and fill it with everything else. And a lot of garbage goes in there.
Yeah.
And, just trying to put like a square peg into a round hole. And eventually people know what the truth is, and they know what is supposed to fit in there. And a lot of people resist for a million different reasons, but you're exactly right. That's exactly what people need to fill that, is God filling their heart, their mind, their soul, and having that connection. And that's where things start. And we tell people it's not, we don't expect anybody to be perfect, even in the middle of having a relationship with God. But what's really important is what direction you're moving. Are you moving towards that? Are you renewing yourself? Are you transforming yourself? Are you moving, trying to get closer to God? Doesn't matter where you start. Some people start close to God already. Some people start as far away as you could possibly ever be. But the important thing is, what direction are you moving in? And we're moving in the right direction every day. So that's so cool to hear you talk about that, and hear, we believe there's, things happen for a reason. I'm 100% believer in that, and I think vets is proof of that for sure. So,
well, I can tell you, when I describe my life today, it's not anger, frustration, resentment, despair. It is light, life, love, hope, happiness, fulfillment, joy, purpose. It's everything. So we didn't even talk about, and I know we don't have time to, the period of time from Marcus's treatment to like me really coming to an understanding of my purpose and like the footing that I have today. There was a period of time where I doubted that, and I thought we had done something very, very bad because I had this fear attached to my faith. And I have seen lives saved, marriages saved, families restored. All of those things are of God. I have seen people who would have ended their life now saving lives. That is God. Like, absolutely. God doesn't look like, I think, I'm going to be the last person to put God in a box. And so I'm just trying to allow God to work through me and the work that we're doing. But I never want to make it about a treatment or a word.
Right.
It's him.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of these compounds are plants.
Yeah. Stuff that God created.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible that where you're seeing things that God create help people that have been through severe trauma.
Yeah.
Kind of reset, almost like empty that hole out so they can fill it with something good.
Totally.
And that's amazing. And it's when you were going through that doubt and that fear, there's a verse in the Bible where the Apostle Paul says, Lord, I believe, but help me with my unbelief.
Yeah.
In the same breath that he's saying, I believe in you, God, I trust you. Man, you've got to help me with this. I can't get through this alone.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that you spent so much time learning that just trusting God in every step, even when we have doubt in our minds,
100%.
is so important.
It's really been a big learning curve for Marcus too, because the juxtaposition of what he believed in the SEAL teams is like unlearning that. It's almost the exact opposite, that there's power in surrender, that there's strength in vulnerability. It's like taking these concepts and flipping them upside down on their heads and having the courage to step out in faith, which came for me and for us after the suicide of one of our close friends, where I thought, we've known about this for a year and we haven't said anything out of fear of judgment, fear of losing our place in the community. And it's like, what's more important, our pride or someone's life? And so taking that step of faith in talking about something that is so taboo and seeing how, one life, Marcus's life, the fact that Marcus is still here today, the ripple out effect of the hundreds or thousands of lives that are impacted because of his life, times that by, thousands of individuals. We're coming up on 1,000 funded treatments at vets. That's a huge ripple out effect.
Yeah.
I think the world will be a better place because of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing how just one event, one person, one change of life can affect, millions of people, over the course of a lifetime or whatever. And so the fact that, you're starting to get thousands of people through this program, imagine if you were to really somehow try to map that out and figure out how many lives that really affected, one person with the 5 people in their family and their friends. And you're talking about 1,000 people you've funded could have very easily be affecting, 500,000 people.
Sure.
In a very positive way. So it's exponential, big time. So Amber, thank you so much for being a part of this. We can't wait. We'll do some version of this again, Zoom call, whatever we got to do. We got, a lot more questions we'd like to pick your brain about I'll see you as, an expert in this whole relationship thing and how to deal with things. And so we really want to touch base again and pick your brain, all that stuff. So
anytime. Everybody,
thanks a lot for sticking around. Again, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, check them out, help them, donate, help that organization. It is doing amazing things for people in need. So please support that. Check them out on social media. And as always, like, subscribe, put this content out, share it with as many people as you possibly can. We can't wait to see you next time. And as always, take Jesus with you everywhere you go and act like you believe. Thanks.